All right. One thing I want to point out, if you are a consumer of content on the Orange website, there is some stuff about warp.dev in the Linux version on this website today. If you want to head over there, check it out, join the conversation. Some folks from the Warp team, early engineers from our team, are online to answer questions in addition to what you have going on here. So if you can't get your question answered here on the launch party live, please think of this as another place where you can join the conversation. We are going to be doing a giveaway. So this is actually like, we'll use Q&A instead of the chat for this. We'll see how it goes. We have a really exciting prize available to give away at the end of all of this content today. So stick around to learn what that prize is and whether you might be eligible to play to win. There is also, as someone mentioned, a brand new Warp for Linux theme. So Loke is going to demo this when he's demoing Warp running on Linux. We'll tell you where you can go to get that theme, get it downloaded for yourself. It looks like this. It's kind of in the style of this Zoom background that we have all of our Warp for Linux content. You can access it from the Terminal Themes website. That's terminal-themes. Download this, follow the instructions. You're going to need to restart Warp and get the image in the right folder. But this theme is available. We'll send you follow-up more information about how to get it installed after we get through this party. All right. We were talking about that giveaway. I promised you there would be something cool at the end of the call. We'll get to that in a bit. All right. We promised there would be a live demo. Alok Desai is here with us from the Warp platform team. Alok, are you ready to show people Warp running on your Linux machine? Can I pass over the screen sharing to you?
Let's do it. Can't wait.
Okay, awesome. Let's go.
Awesome. Well, first, just to introduce myself, my name's Alok. I am a software engineer at Warp. I'm based in New York. I saw a few other people in New York in the chat. Thanks again for everyone for coming. Melanie, would you mind stopping sharing again, just so I can walk through
Yep,
Warp?
absolutely.
Great. So let me share my screen. We can kind of walk through Warp. Melanie, can you see my screen okay?
It looks beautiful. Looks
Awesome.
perfect.
Cool. So this is Warp. For people who haven't used Warp before, I'm going to spend a little bit of time and kind of just walk through the product. And again, please leave questions in the chat. Happy to answer them as we go. So kind of the first thing that separates Warp is this editor at the bottom. So unlike a traditional kind of terminal, this is a full-fledged text editor. So I can do things like move my cursor around, I can select, I can undo, redo, right? So this works exactly how you'd expect an editor like VS Code to work. We also support kind of more complicated interactions. So I can do something like, hey, I want to build, and then I want to run, but I actually want to run in a specific directory, like using multiple cursors, and all of this kind of just works. Kind of the next feature I want to call out as part of making it easier to enter or execute a command is a feature we call Warp AI. And what's cool about this is it makes it really easy to go from a specific task you want to do to then the actual commands without having to think in Google for a bunch of time to figure that out. So as an example, I could say, hey, how many Rust files are in this directory? And here it actually generates a command to help me accomplish that task. And what's also useful is I can then hover over pieces of this to really understand, what does this command do? What does -L do? What does a WC command do? We also support kind of completions out of the box. So you can see I can hit tab here like I could in a traditional terminal, and you'll see a bunch of metadata about what these commands and what these arguments do. All of this is bundled into Warp, so you don't need to spend a bunch of time kind of configuring all of this or downloading new completion specs for commands that you download. All of it works out of the box. The next thing I want to call is a feature we call blocks. So what this is Warp kind of separates command and its output into one kind of atomic unit that we call a block. And what's great about this is now you can actually kind of navigate your terminal in a little bit more understandable way. So instead of navigating kind of line by line in a traditional terminal, you can really navigate block by block, really be a given command invocation. And by doing this, you can actually, we unlock kind of a whole set of features that you can't do in a more classic terminal. So as an example, let's try to check my code, and you can see, oh, I have this compiler error. If I need help, some other engineer on my team maybe can help me figure this out. I could copy the command or just the output, or even share kind of a rich permalink with other people, and it'll share just the contents of that specific block with folks. We also support kind of richer kind of fine integration, so I can hit Command F here and search just within this specific block. So let's say I had 10 different kind of compiler errors from previous invocations, still learning Rust, that I could ignore all of those and really focus on this specific compiler error. The last one I think that is really useful, is this feature we call kind of block filtering. So you can imagine these are a bunch of server logs, and there's some that are at the info log line, log level, some at error. And really what I care about when trying to debug is what are the errors? And so I can go up here and I can start using block filtering and say, hey, I actually only care about the errors. Let me figure out what's going on. And you can do this for both live and completed blocks. So it's almost kind of like grep, but for any block, either active or finished within Warp. And we can expand this even more, being like, oh, maybe I actually only care about issues with the database and filter it even further. And what's great about this is you can even add lines, kind of contextual lines above or before a given match. So I can say, oh, for each given line, let's add 3 additional lines of context to understand what happened right before or after each one of these matches. Kind of the last thing I want to call is this feature we call Warp Drive. So kind of the pain points we're trying to solve here is that the terminal's been this single user ephemeral tool since day one, but that's not really how developers work nowadays. Developers work in teams and they work collaboratively. So what's great about this is this gives you, Warp Drive gives you a way of kind of sharing workflows or sharing shared commands with other people, either yourself or with kind of a team. So this is kind of an example here where I can have some Kubernetes workflows, some database migration workflows, so forth. So as one example, I could run this workflow of tailing logs on a production server. So this is one that runs via G-Cloud. And you can see it supports parameters. So I can actually enter what is the correct kind of server I care about here. So this is kind of templatizable and parameterizable first as well. And these are really easy to execute. So I can go here and just click this, but I can also use Control R in the same way I'd find commands and search for that workflow and execute that in the same way. And you can also use the command palette to find it. So we have a command palette that searches across actions, searches across any sessions, and also searches those workflows. So again, I can find it right here and then execute it. This all is like very easily editable. I can edit it here, and everyone on my team would see those updates in real time. So last thing I want to show, as Melanie called it before, is that Warp is extensible kind of from day one. So you can define your own themes in YAML files, and it'll be reflected immediately in Warp. So we ship with a bunch of cool ones to start. So some that have a background images, I can even clear this to make it a little bit easier to see. But you can also define your own. So this is the special Linux kind of launch theme that folks will get access to. You can use Tux, you can use kind of whatever background image, whether it's an image or a solid color, to kind of define the right theme that works for you. And we can link our info in our themes repo on how to define these yourself. Great. I think that's kind of the main things I wanted to call out there. Back to you, Melanie.
Oh, look, that was a beautiful demo. Thank you for walking us through Warp. Before we get into Q&A with the team, there's some product questions I want to answer, like little things, like people are really impressed with Warp AI. They think it's super cool. They want to know if Warp AI works without internet, but also what powers it behind the scenes. Can we give a high-level explainer on Warp AI for folks? You don't have to pull up your screen, but I will tell y'all, so some of the features in Warp, like the Warp Drive and Warp AI, they do require internet, but the rest of your terminal core features work offline exactly like you'd expect. And everything is powered with OpenAI APIs, the Enterprise Edition. So when you're using Warp AI, it's not training the models, but it is using that really good updated version of GPT. And if you want more information about that, we can send out some specs on AI. Cool. Yeah, people are interested in offline mode. People are trying to download Warp. Some people are reporting interesting things that we'll want to follow up on. But let's switch gears. This was really cool to see it running. I've got this entire team here with me today, the Warp Platform team. I want to take a second to introduce y'all on the Zoom webinar to everybody who's in this room. And we're going to do live Q&A. I've got some questions teed up. There's so many questions coming in through Zoom. So we'll be addressing some of those over chat and some of those live. But let's do a little around the room. So you met Alok. Alok is a software engineer, one of the earliest software engineers to join the team at Warp, has been working on Warp for Linux for what, like 8 months now, Alok?
Yeah, since May.
Okay, awesome. I'm also going to introduce David. David, say hey. David Stern.
Hey everyone. Also an engineer here, and I've been working on Warp on Linux since May as well.
Fantastic. We've got Abhi Pandya in the room with us today.
Hi, everyone. Also a software engineer. I'm working on maybe a little less than 8 months, but still here.
Fantastic. And Noah from our product team. Say hey, Noah.
Hi everyone, I'm Noah. I'm a PM on the team, and I was helping manage the Warp Linux beta. So you either got an early access email from me or messaged me on Discord a bunch of times asking for early access, and I probably didn't give it to you, but now you have it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, if you participated in that private beta, Noah was probably your favorite person sending you the email with the information about how to get the download instructions through Discord and everything. Okay, cool. So just a little bit of questions and things to get the ball rolling here. One of the things I learned when we were preparing for this launch is that the code for Warp for Linux is like 98% the same as the code for Warp for Mac. So I'm wondering, Alok, team, if you can tell me a little bit about what makes that possible. How is Warp for Linux built? What causes this commonality between them, even though the platforms are so different?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of the architecture of Warp, we actually built our own UI framework, so we can render kind of all the fancy UI you see directly in Rust, ultimately rendering on the GPU. And we kind of designed with the intention of building for multiple platforms from day one. So we built using Rust, which very easily targets a bunch of different platforms. And we kind of defined with very clear abstractions around kind of what the platform boundaries are. So we could then more like easily then build for Linux and know like what are the pieces we need to implement for. So as part of kind of doing the initial work for supporting Linux, there was, I think, a few big pieces. So one was a lot of the windowing work, right? So when initially we were kind of using directly AppKit APIs to create a window, we actually moved for implementing Linux to using Winit, which is a really common Rust library that does a lot of the windowing work for you. And so now we can have like a windowing backend that uses Winit that we'll use for Linux, we'll ultimately use for Windows, and we can use to actually render Warp on the web if we want to do that. And that similarly goes for rendering on the GPU. So before we were using Metal, which are kind of Apple-specific APIs for rendering on the GPU. And we built a kind of port of that uses WGPU, which is kind of a cross-platform graphics API that can render to Metal, it can render to Vulkan, to OpenGL, so forth. And again, we can now use that renderer to support kind of a broad spectrum of platforms. I think actually one of the places that we hadn't thought as intentionally about platforms was key bindings. All of our key bindings in our app were kind of hard-coded to use command. And so we had to kind of take a step back and ensure we were using the proper kind of conversion from command to control. And terminal is especially tricky because you can't just directly replace command with control, right? For control C, that can't be copied because it's then SIGINT directly to the pseudo terminal. And so we had to be especially conscious of places which we needed to do the control shift conversion instead of just control. So I'd say that's maybe the biggest place where we hadn't necessarily thought about kind of like platform abstractions in advance.
Awesome. Yeah, very thorough answer. People who are working on some of these platform abstractions, do you have anything you want to jump in and add about things you worked on or problems you ran into?
Yeah, totally. So I worked on having popping up a native like warning modal to help you prevent yourself from stopping any running processes in the terminal. So if you try to quit Warp, it'll pop up and interrupt you saying like, "Are you sure you want to close this?" So initially we thought about using something more Linux feeling like Zenity or KDialog. But unfortunately we ran into limitations with those tools with like the positioning and like the app hanging while waiting for a response. So instead we built a native version. So on Mac OS, we'll actually show like a Mac OS modal, but on Linux, we built that ourselves. So it's like a warp version of the modal.
Little custom bespoke UI situation there. That's great. Awesome. I mean, yeah, so we talked a little bit about how we were able to make everything like share code with all those libraries. We also talked about some of the abstractions and things that are a little bit different. David, I know that you, when you were working through things with Warp for Linux, we're really digging into the security. There's some questions here about Warp privacy and security I want to answer live, but before I get into that, you want to share a little bit about what you learned about the Linux security model?
Yeah. I think like to start, I want to call out that like Linux and Mac are like very different from like an ideological perspective, right? Like Linux has this like wonderful, diverse ecosystem of like different ways you can do things, and it's very customizable. Apple has one true way of doing stuff on Mac OS, for better or for worse. And with that control over the entire platform from hardware up through software, they're able to authenticate installed software and be able to actually like isolate access to certain things like saved passwords and other stored secrets from application to application. On Linux, really the security boundary is a user account as opposed to an application. And so anything that is running as your user that your user has access to can access anything, right? Makes sense. But the implications are not always obvious. For example, most web browsers, Chrome and Firefox, at least in my testing, store your saved passwords and session cookies using an encryption key that they store in your like user keychain. That keychain is typically unlocked when you log in. And so any application that runs as your user, if it wanted to, actually could read all of your saved passwords and session cookies. And this is one of those things that's like not obvious and quite different between Mac and Linux. And that was, I found that really interesting when I dug into it, that I've been using Linux for over 20 years and I had no idea.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I know, David, you've got like a whole blog post on this topic that hopefully we'll be able to release for people soon if they're building software and they want to learn from that. One thing I will say, if you're new to Warp and like this may be the first terminal that you're ever using that may ask you to log into it, from a privacy and security perspective, like there's just a couple of things that you should know. So like one is you can opt out of any type of telemetry, which is what we use to understand feature usage of Warp as a product team. So if you don't want Warp to know what buttons you're clicking on, how you're using the product, you can disable that upon sign up. But there's other important things to know that like when you're interacting in the terminal, none of your input or output goes to Warp in any kind of way, only if you're interacting with cloud-based features. And then even then it's encrypted and then it's stored securely. So as a team at Warp, we really care about privacy and security. We've got everything stored securely encrypted in Google Cloud servers. We get their production in the United States. And we also are encrypting things as we proxy it to things like OpenAI's enterprise APIs for AI. So just if you have questions about privacy, security, anything that you want to know, raise your hand afterwards. We'll follow up and make sure you get the information you need. I know that can be a new thing for people. All right, switching gears a little bit. Just there's some questions here actually about like just the journey for the team. Like we were a Mac OS focused product for the first couple of years that we were in beta. Now we're serving all these new Linux users. This team may have been a smaller team when it started. Now there's a lot of different type of people working on the platform team at Warp. As a team, engineers, can you share kind of just what you learned about working together, how you stayed focused, and what it's been like to serve this new group of developers?
Bobby, you want to take this one?
Yeah, totally. So I'm a more junior engineer on the team. And I think starting off and hopping on it a little later, there's just so many like little things to cover, like which distributions should I use every day to make sure like Warp is working well? like Fedora happened to be the one that we wanted to cover next. And so now that's what I use every day. I feel like we did a pretty good job of like covering like all those like little decisions and like covering different cases. I'd also say that like dog fooding the product that I work on every day is really, really helpful. It's just like, uniquely helpful because the terminal is a product I use. I use that to make a better version of Warp. So that's been uniquely helpful. And overall, I think like it's been a great experience of like, C engineers, like Alok and David helping me stay unblocked and like test when I need it and pairing when I need it. It's been really great to help on.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like,
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add. So I think what's been interesting about building Warp on Linux is that the team is much larger than kind of the other engineering teams we have. So we have 6 people working just on Warp on Linux. And so there's kind of a lot of almost organizational or operational things we had to enact to make sure people weren't blocked and just to make sure kind of things were moving. We wanted to get Warp on Linux out as fast as possible because there's so many users wanted it. And so part of it is we had kind of more daily check-ins and stand-ups, and also made sure we were kind of like very, very ruthlessly prioritizing to make sure we were prioritizing the right tasks to help unblock the launch and making sure like the things we were working on were really like very, very critical.
That's awesome. Well, I now that we're here, I think, there's so many different ways that you can run Linux in general. So like we'll be having like a whole new ongoing set of work to just make sure that we keep continuing to support things, that bugs get addressed quickly, that kind of maintenance after the launch is so important. In addition to just making Warp for Linux even better, Noah, you're here because I'm hoping that you might be able to share a little bit about where we're going and what's next. So what would you like the folks on the webinar to know about what's on the roadmap?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I see a bunch of questions about Warp on Windows. We are working on it. It's if you give a mouse a cookie, because yeah, today is the Warp on Linux launch, but we are actively working on Warp on Windows. So that should be hopefully coming over the next few months, and you'll definitely expect to hear some updates from us as we get ready to release Warp on Windows. And next, I'll talk about sort of 3 really exciting features. So the first is a revamp of Warp AI. So right now, Warp AI works with a single sort of chat interface where you explicitly pass an input and you explicitly converse with. But when you're debugging issues on the terminal, there's sort of all these really useful pieces of context from previous commands and outputs you've run to tools you have available in your path. So Warp AI is basically a revamp that will make it really easy to share sort of and create these context-aware conversations where you still have full control over what is shared with the AI to make just making the whole sort of feature far more powerful. Next is session sharing. So we've probably all pair programmed or debugged over the terminal where you spend a bunch of time asking sort of the sharer to scroll up or scroll back down, zoom in, copy some specific piece of output, or you Slack potential commands back and forth that you need to copy. So just a whole bunch of context switching. Session sharing is a Warp native functionality, which will actually let participants stream their sessions to each other, independently scroll and interact with the output, and even execute commands if they're given permission on each other's machines. So really streamlining the collaboration process over the terminal. And then lastly, this is Notebooks, which is already in private beta. Notebooks are basically shareable and executable runbooks that live directly in your terminal. So we like to think of them as sort of Jupyter notebooks, but for your terminal. And they make it really, really easy to step through onboarding or incident response flows without context switching. So we are super excited about, I guess, these 4 major roadmap features, and you will definitely hear from me about either being a sort of early beta user of one of these or just when they are publicly released, getting access.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah. Yeah, I love you're answering some of the questions that are coming through about the Windows. When will Warp be available for Windows? Super excited to share what we've got going on with web and notebooks too. I'm going to try. So Ed, who's helping us run this Zoom, has pulled some questions from the Q&A. I want to ask the team. I also see some fun questions. One of the questions that came in was, how much coffee are we consuming? Does anybody want to weigh in on their coffee consumption? Do you even like coffee? What's the vibe?
Alok, you want to talk about your coffee consumption?
I feel like I'm the resident coffee addict at the company. Not so bad. I'm at 2 a day, but I used to be at a much, much more before someone else in our team, Kevin, gave me too much shit about it.
I'm a 1 coffee a day person, but I don't know. On
Respect.
certain days, 2 when I need it, like today.
No coffee for Noah. Abby, coffee, tea? What are you running
Nothing, nothing for me. But I'm only 8 months into working as an engineer, so give me some time.
on? Okay, so I mean, we're not going to judge you. We're not going to push you to develop a caffeine situation. Just, know that if you need support, it is available. Lots of coffee experts around you, Abby. Okay, I love this question about open source. So I know one of the things that we talked about earlier was the Rust-based UI framework, which we definitely want to open source sometime this year. What are our other thoughts about open source in general? Are there other things outside the framework that we're thinking about? What can the team tell us about open source and Warp's roadmap?
Yeah, so Melanie, as you mentioned, we have a Rust-based UI framework, and that's something we very much want to open source. We spent a lot of time kind of investing in it, and by no means do I think it's perfect, but I think it's served us pretty well in terms of allowing us to build a lot of great UI in an actual kind of production environment. And we love for other people to be able to use it. In terms of open sourcing the actual product, Zach, our CEO, actually just unleashed a blog post today that talks a little bit more about our rationale about why we don't want to open source this second. Kind of like the TLDR of it is we really want to focus on making Warp a successful product and a successful business. And right now, we don't think that open sourcing ultimately allows us to do that. And that's not to say that's going to be a hard rule in the future, but we want to be very transparent as we walk through kind of our rationale and make sure we share it with everyone in the community. So I very much recommend, if you feel strongly about this, reading that post and kind of see how we're thinking about the decision right now.
Perfect. Cool. Okay, I'm going to do maybe 2 more technical questions, and then I'm going to give you guys a breather, and we'll try to do something fun before we wrap up here. One of the questions was, what was the toughest, most difficult milestone we completed in this process of porting Warp to Linux? Was there a
Today.
specifically icky thing?
I mean, I think getting everything together for the launch, all of the last features, fixing weird crashes, I think was the most difficult part. Actually, getting a basic version of Warp working on Linux was not that challenging in the scheme of things. I mean, I think it took us a couple weeks maybe. And then there's this very long tail of additional stuff to fix. Mesa released version 24 a few days ago that apparently is incompatible with a bunch of NVIDIA drivers. And so users were like, oh, Warp suddenly started crashing for me. And it's completely out of our hands. And so I think it's really the last 20% or last 5%, which has been the most difficult.
Cool. Okay, good to know. This last question is from Ed's List. We may have talked about it a little bit already, but sorry if I'm making you repeat yourself. But good question, though. I think, with all the different distros, how do we balance the goal of being universal and consistent? Well, I mean, really, I guess beyond the distros, for all of the different platforms and places where you could install Warp, like Warp Web, Windows, Mac, etc. How do we balance that consistency against the native functionality on every platform? Somebody mentioned specifically Touch ID support.
David, you want to take this?
Sure. I'll try and look through the Q&A later and find the Touch ID question to talk about that specifically. But in general, I think our sort of guiding principle was make things make sense on the given platform and feel native, but without sort of giving up all of the core Warp stuff. And I think what Abby was saying before about the quit modal is a good example of that, right? On Mac OS. We used a native platform modal on Linux because we couldn't figure out how to get a good user experience with Zenity or Kdialog, which would be more native, platform native. We decided to build something ourselves. I think another good example here is distribution. On Mac, Warp auto updates by doing the whole installation process by itself. On Linux, if you install via a package manager, auto update is more of an assisted process. So when you go to update Warp, we'll give you the command that you need to run to actually update Warp via your package manager, as opposed to trying to magically do things for you, because we know that Linux users are, want control over when they update things, and know what's going on their system. And so instead of doing it for you, we show you what to do, and you can just sort of press enter or modify it as appropriate.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
think the other thing I'd add to that is we do want mostly our rendering to be consistent across different platforms. So for example, you right click and you don't necessarily see kind of a platform specific context menu. That doesn't really mean anything in Linux, to be fair, but on Mac, right, there's very much a concept of this is what a context menu looks like if I use kind of platform specific rendering engines to render that context menu, use the system to render the context menu. We don't, if you right click, you'll see that it's a context menu that's rendered by us. And that's done like intentionally for a few reasons. So one, it provides kind of a consistent like user experience across different platforms. There's also velocity advantages for us, right? We don't need to build these like specific rendering backends or rendering like quirks for each platform. We can render our UI once, and then everyone will see it kind of consistent across each platform we then support.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna do one more question. Sorry, I keep saying one more. WSL. I'm getting several people asking, is it available on WSL? Can I use it on WSL? What do we know about this?
We've gotten some reports of issues with WSL. We're looking into it. We would like to be able to support it, but apparently we don't right now. So, I don't know, keep an eye on GitHub. We'll open up a GitHub issue where we can track actually fixing it, and people can engage with us there.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you all so much, Warp Platform team, for taking 40 minutes out of your day on our launch day to come online and answer these questions and share about your work. There are so many good questions in the chat. I'm going to try to work with Ed to see if we can get some of these exported, because I would love to be able to answer them in blog posts, Twitter answers, send y'all an email with information. I really, there's so many good things in here. I'm going to try to get information out to people as much as we can. But thank you so much, everybody who's been so engaged. These questions are awesome. I'm gonna share my screen and we're gonna try to do something a little wild here. It's a little risky, so bear with me. We really want to give away something fun to everybody who's here for this party, celebrating with us today. Like I alluded to earlier on the meeting, we have one of these Steam Deck OLED, 1 terabyte, with all the good goodies that we would love to get to somebody who is here on this Zoom today. But we've got some logistical things we have to work through. So there are caveats. I'm sorry, bear with me. We want to make this as fun as possible. But there are a few things about how we can get this to people. So in order to pick who from this call is going to win this Steam Deck, we're going to play some trivia. There are some constraints. So Warp has a huge international user base. We know there are hundreds and thousands of people signed up to use Warp all over the globe, and this is a super global group of people here on the Zoom today. We know there are people from all over the world online right now. Because of customs issues, we can only get this Steam Deck to somebody that has a United States mailing address, which is a bummer, but that means if you are online and you are in the United States or you have a US mailing address we can send the Steam Deck to, you are eligible to fight it out for this trivia. It has to be somebody that's pre-registered on the Zoom. I know we're also live streaming to YouTube right now. So if you pre-registered, the perk is that you're eligible to play the game. The trick here is we are going to make these people in the United States fight for this. They are going to have to get the right answer to a trivia question. And because we don't have live chat, we'll use the Q&A feature instead. So basically the way this will work, I'm so sorry. If you're not in the United States, I really am sorry. I want to make sure that we can play things like this with everybody around the globe in the future. But what we'll do is if you were in the United States, you have a US mailing address. If you are pre-registered, you're on the Zoom. I know, I'm sorry, it's not fair. I'm really sorry. Q&A, if you're on the Zoom and you're pre-registered and you want to play for the Steam Deck, I'm going to ask a trivia question on the next slide. First person to send the answer in as a question through the Q&A this might break Zoom. I don't know if it can handle this many people typing in and answer at the same time. We're going to find out. We're going to hit the limits. We know there might be some local issues. So like, there's a possibility that the first thing that Ed sees come in for his Q&A may be different than what I see. So I'm going to call out to Ed to pick the person on the call. If you're chatting in the Q&A, you're logged into Zoom, you're good. If we've got your name, if you're sending us questions in Q&A, you're logged in. Okay, so if everybody's ready, I'm going to ask the trivia question. If you want to play and you have a mailing address in the United States that can receive this, then we'll go. And Ed's going to pick the winner. So here we go. Everybody get ready. This is the question. According to publicly available Linux lore, what free and open source graphics software program did Larry Ewing use and credit when he created the Linux brand character Tux? First person to get the answer into the question that Ed can see. I see a lot of right answers, Ed. I see a lot of right answers.
We have a winner, and the winner is Sam Fleming. So Sam, we're gonna reach out to you after this call to get your address information, everything else that we need to get the Steam Deck your way, but you are officially the winner.
Amazing. So the answer was GIMP. Thank you, Sam, for reminding it. Somebody said, what is GIMP? How do I describe this? It was like the free open source version of Photoshop when I was young and new to the internet. Like, any GIMP fans here? People use, I feel like this helped me with so many things that I had to design in school and college. Okay, somebody did ask about stickers as well. We sent if you were one of the first registrants to the Zoom, you should have received an email this week with a form to enter your mailing address to get stickers. For stickers, because stickers, we're not as worried about them getting caught in customs, we are going to attempt to mail them internationally. So if you want stickers, you don't have to be in the US necessarily. We will get them in the mail to you. We may lose tracking. We won't be able to guarantee that the stickers make it all the way to you, but we're going to do our best to get all of the stickers out to early registrants across the globe. Oh my gosh, Michael has, I'm sorry, it was not Jeopardy rules. Did you? Michael's like, I need the Steam Deck because I am the only person who sent it over in a question in the Q&A functionality. Someone says GIMP is better than Photoshop. Maybe I agree. Cool. So we've got that Steam Deck going out. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Warp platform team. Thank you to everybody who has come and hung out on this Zoom with us. I am loving just the energy and the questions coming through today. Tough questions, smart questions, fun questions. Thank you for showing up, being kind, bringing the good vibes to us. I'm going to leave you with this. If you are ready to try Warp for Linux, go download it. Let us know if you have trouble logging in. Let us know if you have trouble getting it on your machine. It's available to download today. We are on Twitter if you want to send us a message. We'll try to follow up with people. And then I'm going to give a couple more minutes. I'll put the music back on, let people hang out. If you happen to be thinking about Warp for your team at work, like you have an engineering team at work and some of you use Mac, some of you use Linux, maybe one or the other, and you think it would be great to have Warp AI, Warp Drive, all those good features for your team, just raise your hand. There's a raise your hand feature in the Zoom webinar. Ed will help get you connected to the product team at Warp so that we can talk about what plan might be best for you. But otherwise, just thank you, team. This has been awesome. It's been so fun. I'm going to crank up the tunes, mute myself, and we'll get back to work. Have an awesome day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.